Nearly 10 years since the last entry in the series, Rune Factory 5 has finally arrived. While the farming RPG genre has absolutely exploded over the last decade, developer Hakama has managed to keep pace to deliver an exceptional game. Rune Factory 5 not only evolves the franchise in nearly every conceivable way, but is undeniably the best entry yet. Rune Factory games never have straightforward stories like most games, but instead they more just have setups. And here with Rune Factory 5, it's no different. You'll appear in a mysterious land with no memory of who you are or where you come from. Gotta love that good old amnesia JRPG cliche. After being taken in by villagers, you decide to become a ranger and join XSEED, an organization with the goal of keeping the peace. You start off doing small tasks like fighting monsters, rescuing characters, and doing small tasks for villagers. However, as the game goes on, a bigger plot unravels that, of course, I won't spoil. I was actually kind of surprised at how interesting it was and how much I got hooked into it. I don't remember Rune Factory 4 having a really interesting story at all, so it was really cool to have one that kept me hooked here. Now, this won't be something that is constantly going on. It's sort of interspersed throughout the game depending on what day it is or what you're doing. Now, what Rune Factory 5 lacks in a traditional story, it more than makes up for with smaller character stories. You'll regularly trigger events with specific characters that kick off a story that lasts about a few in-game days. Here you'll learn about these characters, their backstories, and kind of what makes them tick, as well as other villagers that are close to them, like their family and friends. I actually enjoyed these a lot because it gave me the opportunity to get to know characters that I otherwise probably would not have given the time of day. But overall with a story, what I loved is that there's always something going on. Whether it's the next phase of the main story, a new character's side story, a request, or whatever, you just never feel lost and you never feel like nothing's going on. In fact, if you open your menu, it'll tell you the current state of the main story as well as whatever's going on with your character's side story. Now, it may not always be clear where you need to go or what you need to do next, but give it a few days and eventually some kind of icon will appear and it'll be clear how to progress the story or what to do next. Rune Factory 4 and the last few Story of Seasons games felt really light on story, so I loved having much more to get into here. Growing relationships is my favorite part of these kinds of games, so it was really thrilling to see them expanded on so much. Rune Factory 5 continues the farming life sim meets action RPG gameplay the series is known for, but expands upon it in nearly every manageable way. Now, when you begin the game, you'll start with a small plot of land to farm. Here you can grow crops, collect plants to sell or use for crafting, chop wood, destroy rocks, and pretty much everything else you'd expect from a farming game. Now, you can't expand this particular land itself. However, as the game goes on, you'll have dragons that you can farm on. I know it's kind of weird, but just go with it. Here you have much more land to farm and places you can gather materials. This is also where you can build barns if you rescue monsters in the wild. There's also a convenient teleporter right next to your original piece of land to hop between pretty easily. Growing crops is a good way to make some money and use them to cook with, but it's not the main focus of the game. In fact, for me, the best way I found to make money was to fish. I would bring in thousands of gold every day, sometimes tens of thousands depending on if I got a rare fish or not. I would recommend doing this early on to make some money because it takes a little while for the farming to get going. The fishing minigame itself is kind of simple, but it's still relaxing nonetheless. Now, when you're not fishing or tending to your crops, you'll probably be fighting your way through a dungeon. Typically, these are tied to some kind of story progression, and overall, it's pretty easy, hard to get lost, yet still fun. There's a lot of different ways that dungeons are made interesting here, like walls that you need your farming tools to break, Indiana Jones style boulders, and much more. Now, the combat itself is much better than Rune Factory 4, but compared to other action RPG contemporaries like Ys or the Tales series, it has a long way to go. Now, you have a basic attack, a dodge, and 2 slots for special abilities, and you will slowly acquire these abilities throughout the game, and they can be anything from weapon-specific moves to spells or healing abilities. Now, the way you use items is incredibly clunky. You need to first open the menu, then hold the item, and then use it. As far as I could tell, there isn't a way to easily assign a particular item to like a quick hotkey button. There must be a better way to do it, but as far as I could tell in my time playing, I just couldn't figure it out. Now, what I really appreciated about the combat is that there is a large variety of weapons. My personal favorite were the dual blades and the fist weapons. Dual blades are probably the fastest weapon in the game, and I always like fast weapons, and the fist weapons are really interesting because you can kind of beat up your enemies enemy, but then pick them up and slam them like a wrestling move. And this actually was really helpful against enemies that were probably a little too high level for me, and I could kind of cheese my way through these fights using the fist weapon. Now, whether you're having a hard time or just want more people in your party, you can bring up to 3 characters with you to these dungeons. Again, it makes it pretty easy, but it's also a good way to increase your relationship status with these characters. You can also capture and use one monster to fight with you in your party if you want to. Now, to make combat easier, you can craft items of all kinds, like potions, armor, weapons, and more. Now, what's kind of weird about this is that the recipes you don't just buy or guess, you actually get them from eating bread. Yeah, that's right, there's a baker that will sell you bread, and by eating bread, you learn recipes. I'm not sure what the logic behind this is, but that's how it is. Now, sometimes you can't eat a particular type of bread until you increase that skill enough, and sometimes even I leveled up my skills a lot and it wasn't clear what I was doing wrong. And the other frustrating thing is that you can get bread and then get repeat recipes. This was much more rare, but it did happen. Now, of course, I can't talk about a Rune Factory game without talking about the relationships aspect. Here in Rune Factory 5, it's better than ever. There's way more dialogue and way more in-depth character stories. And unlike Pioneers of Olive Town, there's no repeating dialogue. It always felt fresh here. Every time I went in to talk to a character to give them their gift for the day or whatever's going on, it seemed like something new was always being said. Now, as far as who I decided to romance, I went with Lucy. She's just really cute, spunky, and has an awesome character design. Not to mention she was voiced by Erica Lindbeck, who voiced Futaba from Persona 5 and Shion from Tales of Arise. I also liked Fuka a lot. She's kind of this half wolf girl and she makes a ton of adorable wolf noises, but to me she just looked like a little kid with her character design, and I just kind of felt weird romancing her. They also did introduce same-sex relationships here in Rune Factory 5, so that is great. Now, this is just a personal complaint, but why can't I romance characters like Misasagi and Elge, if that's how you even say it? They're the hottest female characters in the game, and I would have loved to be able to romance them. Now, the festivals and the town events here are kind of interesting. There are some that are just built into the game itself, but then there are others that you need to essentially invent. You're able to do this through directives. As you play the game, you'll accumulate this sort of social currency for helping out the town, and then you can spend it on improving shops, like upgrading them so they can sell more items, upgrade your house, and also for creating festivals. Now, you won't be able to do all the festivals unless you have a ton of money, but it is kind of interesting to be able to set up the ones that you like. Now, the festivals themselves are just kind of okay. Some had some actual interactable activities, and some others were just, hey, this is here if you want to participate in it, but there's really no way to interact with it. Overall, the daily loop was really fun. There's a large variety of activities to do. However, I will say that the days felt kind of long. More often than not, I would get everything done I wanted to do in a day, and it would be kind of early, like 3 or 4 o'clock at night, and most of the time I just ended up going to bed early. Now, having long days isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if you want to get a lot done, but I always wanted to get to the next day, get to the next season, so for me it just felt a little odd that they were so long. Oh, and also, the shopkeepers really need to leave me alone. Whenever you open up a menu in a shop, the shopkeeper is constantly telling me to take my time, like every 3 seconds. I'm trying to take my time, but you won't just leave me alone.
Please take your time. Please take your time. Take your time. Take your time.
Now, I know one of people's biggest concerns about Rune Factory 5 was the performance. At launch in Japan, it really didn't run well. However, I'm happy to say that in the Western release, it runs great. Now, it's a solid 30 frames per second. Obviously, they're not going to get it up to 60 frames per second. And outside of a few issues like right when you exit buildings or having a full party in a crowded dungeon, it runs pretty well. And overall, it has a huge visual upgrade compared to Rune Factory 4. Character models look absolutely fantastic, lots of detail, the character portraits are great, and there's actually some cool monster designs. Now, the animations themselves were a little stiff, but don't really ruin anything overall. As for the town itself, it's really bright and colorful. That said, the texture work seems a little low quality. Everything just kinda looks flat. And the same goes for the dungeons. Some looked really great, like the ice dungeon with this sort of, icy filter on it, but others just looked kinda off. Overall though, it was a joy to explore this world. It's super colorful and there's a lot of cool little details. The music is also great. Tons of charming and chill tracks. Whether you're farming, talking to people, or even going through the dungeons, you'll enjoy the music. Now the voice acting is interesting. The performances themselves are good, but they're weirdly sparse. At one point a character will say a full sentence, and then the next sentence is just not voiced.
Captain Livia was just telling me about you. Frankly, I cannot accept your admittance to XSEED.
I don't know what the thought process was between kind of splitting up the voice dialogue, but it's really weird and jarring. Rune Factory 5 is an absolutely spectacular game. It nails the farming RPG game loop and improves upon pretty much every aspect from the last entry. There were weekend days where I was playing this game and that was literally all I did day and night. And even now, after beating the game, all I want to do is keep playing more and dive into all the post-game content. If you like farming RPGs like Story of Seasons, Stardew Valley, and others, you absolutely have to pick up Rune Factory 5. I promise you that you'll love it. Now there's a ton of games that have been coming out lately, and if you want to hear about another action RPG that you might like, check out my review for Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more weekly JRPG content. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.